Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras, here with ILTV's Morning Briefing.
Israel's Prime Minister has just announced the closure of the Kerem Shalom crossing point with Gaza until further notice. This checkpoint is the only place along the Israel border where food, water, and aid can be transferred into the Strip. Israel says specially approved ships will still be allowed in, but in announcing the closure, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it very clear that the majority of operations will be shuttered. This crackdown is intended to send a clear message to Hamas leadership that instability and violence against Israel will not be taken lightly. A position echoed by Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who slammed Hamas for continuing to allow flaming kites to be flown into Israeli territory. These brush fires, on top of the weekly border clashes that started back in March, represent an overall Palestinian frustration with a political situation that only seems to be deteriorating. A frustration that Israel believes Hamas is taking advantage of at the cost of Gazan lives. Palestinian leaders, including those from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, say the closure of the crossing is tantamount to a declaration of war. Others say this is a punitive form of collective punishment that will only worsen the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and increase instability. Still, Israeli leaders have clearly had enough. For now, it remains to be seen whether this will have the intended effect. President Donald Trump has announced his Supreme Court nominee to replace Anthony Kennedy as Brett Kavanaugh, and Jewish groups are immediately clapping back. Anti-Defamation League head Jonathan Greenblatt released a statement writing that the ADL is concerned that Judge Kavanaugh's judicial record does not reflect the demonstrated independence and commitment to fair treatment for all that is necessary to merit a seat on our nation's highest court, end quote. The 53-year-old federal court Judge Kavanaugh has often spoken and written publicly on his stances against abortion rights and in favor of increased executive and presidential powers. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has already said he'd fight against the nomination, as he and many others agree that it would be a threat to labor, civil, health, and human rights for millions of Americans. And if Kavanaugh is confirmed, the Supreme Court will then consist of a highly conservative, five-man majority. Despite a growing international condemnation of the practice, the Palestinian Authority has vowed to plow ahead with paying stipends to terrorists and their families. While Israel sees these so-called martyr payments as an obvious incentive to carry out violence against Israeli citizens, President Abbas clearly sees this as a red line for his own administration, one that he's prepared to hold firm on even at the cost of millions of dollars to his own people. This comes less than a week after the Israeli government officially froze tax funds to the Palestinians that the state believes was being funneled to these martyr funds. Other nations around the world, most recently Australia, have similarly halted direct payments to the PA. This year alone, President Abbas has reserved nearly $300 million for the purpose of paying Palestinians and their families who were either jailed or killed while carrying out a terror attack. That accounts for nearly 7% of the year's entire budget. In addition to widespread accusations of inciting and even encouraging violence, critics have also pointed out that this amount of money, if invested into Palestinian infrastructure, would serve a considerably better purpose, especially given Palestinian demands for aid following recent cuts to the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency by the US. For Abbas, however, the decades-long practice of paying these stipends is deeply rooted in internal Palestinian politics. On a purely political level, analysts speculate that even if Abbas wanted to halt the payments, it would be career suicide to do so, especially given his already low approval figures. The obvious counterpoint here, though, is that his leadership has failed to give Palestinians a true, lasting hope for peace in the first place, which only cements the public demand and expectation for these stipends. The first step in any battle is to identify and define the problem. While South Carolina has just become the first U.S. state to adopt a uniform definition of anti-Semitism. The definition, which comes from the State Department, was included in the South Carolina state budget passed last week, and while it only lasts for a year, Jewish rights groups are hailing the decision. A permanent version of the bill failed to pass for concerns of impinging on the First Amendment right to free speech. But according to the proviso on the books, the definition only refers to the 3 Ds: demonization, double standard, and delegitimization, as well as calls for violence against Jews, Holocaust denial, and harassment. Essentially, it allows for hate crimes to be clearly labeled as such, crimes which are already unprotected acts.
That's all for now. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.